Welcome to Sense of Self, a conversation series about reclaiming our narratives, where we dive deep into the journeys that shape who we are. I'm your host, Dr. Gauri Aragam.
Even in my 30s, that first wound of not being worthy or of being unworthy still exists.
In today's episode, I speak with Francisca Alegría, a director and award-winning filmmaker based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. In my conversation with Fran, we talk about how she survived sexual abuse at just 6 years old. In response, she crafted a rich fantasy world, a place of refuge and imagination that in many ways became her lifeline. We talk about how that inner world didn't just help her survive. It became the wellspring of her creativity, ultimately inspiring her to pursue filmmaking as a way to express herself and connect with others. We also talk about how, for years, emotional intimacy felt out of reach, but how through the support of family, friends, and therapy, she was able to accept parts of herself that she'd been fully unaware of, and is now living a life full of creativity and love. As a heads up, this podcast episode contains discussion about childhood sexual abuse, which may be triggering or distressing for some listeners. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of self-harm or suicide, please seek help from a mental health professional or contact a crisis helpline. It is important to note these discussions do not constitute mental health care. Each guest has given their consent to participate, has had full control over what aspects of their journey were shared, and either currently engages in therapy or has done so in the past. So get comfortable, take a breath, and join us for another conversation about breaking cycles, finding hope, and reclaiming what it means to be yourself. This is Sense of Self. Let's get started. Would love if we could just begin by you telling us your full name and where you grew up.
My full name is Francisca Andrea Alegría Centeno. I am from Chile. I was born in a city next to the Pacific Ocean called Viña del Mar, but I was raised between the countryside where my grandparents live from my mom's side and Santiago, the capital. I would say my most close to the heart memories are in my grandparents' farm in the countryside.
Would you share a little bit about kind of what you know as to what that name means, where it came from?
So my first last name is Alegría, which means joy in English. When I was 10 or 12, I thought that it wasn't like a great last name, because it wasn't like this exotic word. So I always wanted like a bigger or extreme last name, until one of my aunts from my dad's side told me that actually the last name came from a woman, did not come from a man. Because my grandfather, the father of my father, was born from an only mother. And this grandma, who was Peruvian, she fell in love and she got pregnant. And the guy did not want to get married. And she was from a very conservative family in Peru. And the family decided for her to have an abortion. And she said, I won't have an abortion. I want to have this baby. And they said, okay, then you need to leave the country because you're a shame to the family. And so the story goes that this woman named Susana Alegría came with her godmother. And the story says a little box of jewels all the way down to Valparaíso, where I was born as well. And my great-grandmother just had to survive there by herself in a new country, really young, with a newborn. And so in Chile, when you don't have a father, the children receive the last name of the mother twice. So my grandfather was Mario Alegría Alegría. So double joy, which is amazing now. And so this story just changed my whole perspective of who I was. And it just gave me such a sense of pride of carrying the last name of this woman.
And how old were you when you found out that that was the story?
Around 14, 15, when I was a teenager.
Yeah, what a powerful and motivating person to have in your lineage. You can really draw on that kind of courage, I imagine, after finding out about her. What was your social standing, your family?
I come from a very privileged background in Chile. In the countryside, my grandfather owned a lot of land and he had many workers to work the land. And so growing up, I went to a private school where I was taught English since I was 4 years old, which gave me this huge set of tools that most of my country did not have and still doesn't have.
Were you given any instructions by your family as to how to behave, who to talk to, where to go, how to stay safe?
I remember, especially my grandma, maybe like, careful not to play with the boys next door that were poor, basically, that had like tiny houses with no floor. And I remember sometimes maybe like not being so close with the cleaning ladies, for example, things like that, that I think still remain in my society.
And you were probably how old at that time?
Yeah, 5, 6, 7 until 12, that these things were said to me. And then you start hearing that in the city as well, and in other ways.
Yeah.
Like very protected. I was taken everywhere. I wasn't seeing other realities really until I was 18.
When kids are 5, 6 years old and they're living in kind of that bubble, you almost hope that sometimes kids will feel invincible in some ways, because that is how little kids maybe should feel when they're that young.
Exactly.
Before learning about the world. And do you ever feeling that way? Like, okay, if I follow these rules and do these things, like, I guess that means I'll be okay.
Yes, but I learned that I wasn't invincible at a very young age. I felt like in this huge farm where I could go anywhere and play with the horses, with the cows, in the swimming pool, wherever I wanted. There was one event that marked my whole life and actually made me understand that the world was not just for me to go around freely, which was a sexual abuse at the age of 6 from a worker of my grandfather. Mm-hmm. And I remember very many details about it. And I've worked psychologically for decades, but it was very strange for me and very difficult to understand. But maybe before going deeper, it's really interesting because we were talking about the social differences.
Yeah.
And this happened with a worker that I remember that his shoes were barely there, right? Like he was someone that I could understand and see that he didn't have much clothes. His clothes were sometimes, most of the time, not clean. Mm-hmm. The contrast, the class contrast was brutal.
Well, first, thank you for sharing that with me. In a space like that, it can be very both wonderful to have that freedom and also difficult to know what's safe and what's not. And then it gets murkier when it comes to the class divide that you're talking about, because you've sort of been given these rules and warnings by your family as to where to go, who to talk to.
For sure.
From your perspective, was that because they were trying to keep you safe or because there was prejudice against people who didn't have as much?
There was a bit of both, especially now growing up. I know the fear that we have with the girls in our society, right? So that is there, right? Like a girl, 6 years old, running around by herself. I think it's like triggering for everyone. But it was definitely tied with a prejudice against people from a different class, for sure. I feel that at that time, it wasn't workers, but it was like wealthy men walking around. They wouldn't have said careful. Yeah. Although we know that predators don't belong to a class. They're everywhere, right? So I think that it was definitely both.
I remember you mentioned something previously about how you were actually approaching this person from a place of goodwill. Can you share more about that?
I was in my grandparents' farm in the house. It was my world. But at that time, my mom was not there. My dad was in a trip somewhere, probably Japan or something. And my grandfather was not there. And my grandma asked me if I would go to church with her. And I said, no way. So I stayed by myself. And I thought of this person because he was the worker of my grandpa that, to me, I felt his sadness. I knew that he was a sad person. He was sad. So I was like, and I saw his clothes, that they were not clean. He barely had shoes. So I thought, you know what? I've been saving some money. At that time, it probably was like $1.50, but saving some coins. And instead of using them to buy something for myself, why don't I give these coins to him? You know, I had this little box with the coins and I went where I thought he would be. He was either like in the stables or doing woodwork or something like that. And so I caught him in a dark warehouse where he was working some wood or maybe chopping some wood. And I gave the box to him. I don't remember, the memory doesn't have dialogue in my mind, but I do remember kind of like giving it to him and saying, here, like, this is for you, this is a gift.
Yeah.
And I remember him grabbing the coins, the box with coins, and putting it aside, and then grabbing me and starting to touch my chest, and then like grabbing me really hard, and then giving me like a full like kiss on my mouth. And that's, at that age, you don't understand what's happening, and it's someone that is so big, you know, in size. I saw him like a giant, and he was also tall. So luckily, I say luckily because I know many of us women have gone through sexual abuse. And for me, I feel lucky because at a moment I got like the lucidity to say, my grandma is calling for me. It was a lie, but I knew that he was grabbing me so tight that something worse could happen. And he didn't let go. And then I said it loudly. I said it louder. I said, my grandma is calling me.
Yeah.
And he let go, and I just ran back to the house. And again, I think it's important to say, because what I remember next came after a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
I didn't remember this in the beginning, but I remember sitting in the TV room, and I think that I put the TV on with something, and I sat there in front of the TV. And that's where a psychologist or therapist told me that my brain got dissociated, because I was like, okay, I'm back to normal. I'm watching TV and this is okay. I'm okay. Nothing happened, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what happened. And I say lucky because we know so many stories that go worse, but I also understand that we cannot just minimize that, because although there was no penetration, I've been with therapists that say that is at that age, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's still cataloged as rape. It has taken me a while to not minimize it.
It's striking that you had awareness that calling for your grandma specifically would yield the result that you wanted, because your grandma was his boss, and that's who you thought of as your protector at that time as well. In that moment when you remember now, kind of dissociating, you're 6, you're trying to make sense of what's just happened. It doesn't make sense with the rest of your experience. And so you put it in a box. It goes into this mental box that's separate from the rest of your life. And then you are convinced that, cool, it's separate. That means it's gone. It's done. I have tossed it away. I'm now back to my regularly scheduled programming of watching TV and playing around the house. Do you remember anything that changed in your own behavior?
I feel that at that second, like a huge dark well opened in my chest. And that I started like collecting, gathering emotions, sensations, stories, things that belonged only to me, because I could not share them to the world. So I get a bit emotional. I feel that it's like a place where I connect to grief, but it's also a place where I connect with my creativity. And so I remember that it changed in many nights where my parents were not home, or I remember feeling very afraid. And because my reaction was, or my defense mechanism was to keep silent and not tell anyone.
Yeah.
I would try to kind of like sing songs in my head for me to like go to bed. So there was that moment at night that felt like this big sort of like black hole that was kind of like sucking me in. But at the same time, my creativity started like blooming in a way, like I started kind of like imagining things, stories. So again, I feel that there was kind of like a duality in that new space that opened. And I think that I wouldn't be pursuing storytelling if it wasn't for that event. I see meaning in everything, and there was sort of like a fairy tale sort of narrative into what happened, right? Like there's an exchange. There's a little girl that gives like golden coins to a man. The man gives something to the girl that is dark, that is horrible, but that also opens like a key, like a whole kingdom that is fully creative, but not happy in a sense. I know that a lot of people, they don't find anything positive in their lifetime after something like this. But to me, it's difficult to say, but I would not remove that event from my life.
While on one hand you had dissociated, on the other hand, you still experienced this kind of like deeper well of grief. When kids are that age, they're just like, okay, I guess this is who I am now.
Yeah.
Even older, you can be like, I guess this is who I am now.
Yeah.
Is that what happened to you? How did you start to understand yourself, if at all, at that time?
For sure. That was the hardest part, that I like something in my sense of self changed, because I saw myself as like someone marked by a dirty sort of stamp. I had a stamp now that was not pure. And there we could talk ages about the Catholicism of it all. It affected my self-esteem deeply. I felt different from the rest of the girls, and I felt I was not worthy of people's love. And so it was really hard for me to have romantic relationships for a long time.
Did religion play any role in why you felt like you shouldn't or couldn't share what had happened with your family?
Luckily, because I consider myself a lucky person, my family, my direct family, they're not really religious. My parents are not religious. But we all know now that the heritage of Catholicism in Latin American countries just came as a huge permeating substance, even if people did not go to church. It wasn't like directly about religion, but I did feel a sense of shame and guilt, because now that you bring this up, this sense of being marked or feeling dirty has to do with what Catholicism, or other religions as well, put on us women. What is to be pure? What is that? I have no idea what is to be pure. But I knew that I wasn't that anymore. And so that felt that I wasn't good enough. It wasn't direct, the religion, but in my country, it's just like everywhere. The guilt, the women's guilt is in all of our families.
The permeating substance, it is impacting everybody. It's in the water, right? So no matter what age you are, as soon as you're able to sort of be aware of it, you're aware of it. And it clocks as that shame. Were you worried that your family would judge you or be upset?
No.
What you remember, or was it something different?
Maybe not judge me, but start seeing me differently, start seeing me with other eyes. I think that that's with other people that I've talked about, with other women. It's like we don't want the world to see us differently because we haven't done anything. So that is a big fear, because it's like this horrible, dirty, quote unquote, thing happened to us. So now the world will see us dirty. And so that is the shame. That's where the shame comes from. I knew that my family would believe me no matter what.
Yeah.
But it was just like I was never there. I always stayed in that first fear of, I want to maintain myself clean. So for that to happen, I cannot tell anyone, right? So that's like the vicious circle. And on top of that, I had to deal with the guilt of feeling like a coward, because what if this man, he could do that to my cousins, to my sisters, to other girls? And so because I couldn't talk about it, I also felt, that I wasn't being brave and that I was a really shitty human being, because I was just thinking about myself and not thinking about other girls. So that also kind of like fucked my brain a little bit.
Oh my goodness. So you saw yourself not only as marked, but as a shitty, selfish person.
Exactly.
What you're talking about is survival instinct, right? That is like the most human thing possible, especially when you're a child. You're doing exactly what you feel like needs to happen. You're not thinking beyond that. How can you? Your brain isn't developed to do that. It inevitably impacts how you're then going to go through the world and what you allow into your life and what you engage in. And so you mentioned it sort of fueled this creativity, which already existed in you or else it could not have been tapped. How did that creative part of you start to express itself?
I started drawing. Images would come to my head and I would just draw the thing like perfectly without having like a sketch or anything. So that has started happening. There was a specific drawing that I did once that it just came like, and I did it in like 20 seconds. And in my sketchbook, and it was like a big male foot coming at like a woman, like kind of like kneeling in the ground. And I remember my therapist at the time when I was 19. I never told my therapist what happened, but she wanted to tap into what was wrong with me because I had a big depression. And I brought her like an old notebook that I did when I was a teenager. And she saw that drawing and she was like, wow, this is really interesting. You know, it's like a huge, giant male foot coming onto, you know, a woman kneeling with barely clothes. And where does it come from? And I said, I don't know.
There are so many different ways this conversation could go after what you described to me in terms of this abuse you experienced. But because one of the things that you initially said was that it impacted your relationships for the foreseeable future, what were you referring to?
When I was a teenager between 15 and 19, I had boyfriends, but I would never want to like stay too long dating. So whenever it became a bit more close, like, kissing, great. Like physical things for me was fine, but getting into emotions was not easy. And so I struggled with the idea of falling in love, for example. I had somewhere in my childhood or pre-adolescence, I had this idea stuck in my brain that there were two kinds of people who could fall in love and people who could not fall in love. And I felt that I was in the second category. I was like, okay, I'm just going to date people and that's it. That's going to be my life. And so I kept growing a bit more and I had like really cute boyfriends that were really nice to me, but I got bored. I would say that the first time that I felt in love was to an American in the US. Blonde hair, all, American style. And I remember just completely being opened to love. And it was the first time that I felt that way. And it was amazing until it wasn't.
So you're telling us about how getting emotional with partners was very difficult. And nowadays we hear more about this being difficult for survivors of abuse, specifically this kind of emotional intimacy. And now there's more understanding as to why that might be. But to your point, you were in a time and in a context where none of that was even on your radar, right? You were trying to draw these pictures, creating these stories in your head. You're like, this never happened. At the same time, you also had this sort of internal monologue of, I have a mark on me. I don't believe in love. I can just even imagine you creating this world where these rules make sense to you and you are sort of ascribing traits to yourself of like, this is Fran, someone who draws really well, is really cool, who will be physical with guys, but I don't fall in love. So I guess that makes me curious about the first time that you did fall in love. How did you know that you were in love at that time? Like, what did it feel like?
Well, I had an image because I'm very visual, but from 16 to 23, I was depressed and I was on meds. And I remember just like the drag of life. And so I met this person and I remember one day like feeling just like I was living again. And I remember just walking the street where I was living in at the time and seeing hundreds of different shades of the flowers of a garden. And I was like, wow, I had not seen colors in such a long time. And I think that falling in love for the first time at age 23, I just like enjoyed every minute. And that changed me completely.
Yeah.
Until it went bad.
So you mentioned how this relationship was a beautiful thing, kind of helped you see in Technicolor. Feels like it got you out of a depression, because what you're talking about is sometimes what people say when they're actually responding to the depression treatment. And it may have been timing that you actually were improving from your depression and you met this person, these things coincided. Whatever the case may be, it felt as though meeting this person, being with this person, coincided with you being able to feel something in this world and see in this world again. Could you give us a sense of, generally speaking, how that relationship ended?
For sure. He had a lot of anger issues. So he was very aggressive. And I understand he came from a different background. He was adopted. And although his adoptive family was great, his parents were amazing, at the time, his wound of abandonment was very, very deep. And he could have great days, but he would become very aggressive as well. He was struggling with bipolar syndrome. And sometimes he wouldn't take his meds, or like he would feel that he didn't need them. And he really tried. We were together for 3.5 years. And so it just wore me out until it became physically violent. And that's when, not immediately, because when you're damaged, you don't see that as so awful. But because it was so much, so consistent in time, I just was drained emotionally. And luckily, I got out of it. I understood that I got into this role of savior, of coming from a loving family and loving friends and loving everything. And I could give whatever he lacked. And that doesn't work. Partnerships should be leveled. It should be an equilibrium. And that did not happen.
You can look back on it now and people always wonder, how did I get into a situation like that? You always wonder, what is it about me that got into a situation like that? But you're also describing how this was still at a time where you had experienced a depression, but you had not yet processed your abuse history.
Exactly.
In your youngest form, like your most innocent form as a young girl, you wanted to help someone who you saw as being really down and not having as much as you. And not just not that, but also feeling particularly sad. And something about that called to you and you felt like you could do something small to maybe help feel better. And so that idea of saviorhood was both emotional, but there was like a financial portion to it too. And so to your point of things being complicated, it's like the emotional, the class issues, like how you understood your place in the world, in Chile at least. What's also, I think, important to remember is that this story with this partner who ended up being abusive did not happen in Chile. It happened in America. Can you tell us kind of how you ended up in the US?
Well, there's 2 stages of the US. The first one was an exchange program that I took while I was at the university here in Chile studying film. And I luckily found the strength to do it. And I applied. And I ended up getting into UC Santa Barbara. And in the beginning, it was just going to be 6 months. But that's when I fell in love with him. And I ended up staying a year. I think all of our lives have a perfect sort of like combination of events. The first time that I went there, I met him, I fell in love. And when I went to do my master's, I was divorcing him because we got married. And so the next stage in the US, which was in New York, is one of the most important stages in my life.
Up until that point, how had you made sense of yourself?
At that time, I was not taking care of my body. I didn't do sports anymore, and I started drinking a lot. And so I put all my coins in my thinking, in my brain. And so I would be the one with the smart jokes at the party rather than dressing sexy at the party because I wanted to cover myself. I was not understanding that I was bisexual or pansexual like I understand it today. But I would enjoy and admire women, I was not brave enough to say, hey, I also like women. Before meeting this person, I would just kind of like play with people's hearts. I would kind of like seduce boys or men, depending on the age, knowing that I was not in love. And like, I feel like I got into this sort of like character that again would like not go into the deeper layers of a relationship or love and make it like fun and irreverent and, you know, kind of like cool.
You did not feel cool, whatever their definition of cool was, right? You know, engaging in these behaviors and things that make people feel like fun, irreverent, light, go with the flow. And this person that you ended up with sort of embodied all of that, which felt like it was fulfilling some part of you that you did not have. By association, you then get to be those things that you feel like you're lacking, which ultimately doesn't work out because until you've seen in yourself that you're not actually lacking, you're never going to get that fulfilled by another person. It's just like not possible, which can be a real sucker punch when you're like, oh my gosh, you know, but it forces you to examine things and be more open with yourself. I see you smiling and nodding while I'm saying this. What about what I just said resonates with you?
It's crazy because although what you're saying could feel very obvious, it's exactly how I felt with my current partner, which makes me understand that even in my 30s, that first wound of not being worthy or of being unworthy still exists when you keep growing. And you can be successful in this and win this award or go to this prestigious university and blah, blah, blah. But it's an underlying theme in my life, which I feel that I am realizing or embodying it in a different way. I feel like, but it's been almost like 34 years of working to believe that you're worthy without someone else.
Do you feel like the sole purpose of your current relationship is to make up for deficits you feel like you have?
Not anymore. I had problems in the beginning because I was feeling so unworthy that I would like call my friends and say, how do I do it? I'm with this gorgeous, fantastic, talented woman that I don't deserve. So how do I do it? But that was 7 years ago. We're getting married this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. She's also someone that has been working on herself since she's a teenager. So it's really mind-blowing at this moment. One, to understand that it permeates so deeply that even in your 30s is still like a big issue. Mm-hmm. But also that if you take it step by step, it's not so bad to realize that I did make a shift within a relationship. I didn't have to like escape the relationship. I did the work with her. With her containing that a lot.
It's really lovely actually to be with somebody who you admire and respect, which is different to your point than having them fill a void of what you feel like you're incapable of or that you don't have inherently. There's a slight difference, but it's an important one, right?
Like one of my teachers say, it's a subtle and profound difference.
Subtle, profound difference, which is not obvious when you're in it by any means. And it's not a great feeling to have. It's very humbling and you have to really be willing to look at yourself in a way that many people never do or never have to or never in the position to. But
it's not easy.
I think it's not easy to do. And it makes me wonder, you used your wit and your charm to be in a room and take up space in the room, but hide your physical self. Mm-hmm. You also said that you were not yet out to yourself. What happened to allow yourself to do that after you ended the relationship with that man and ended up dating this woman?
I am a believer of being aligned to the subtle energies of the universe or not aligned. At that time, I was not. Mm-hmm. Like the world, the universe, however you want to call it, like slaps you really hard until you get it, right? So, so for me, I had to hit like rock bottom. And what happened was like, after maintaining a toxic relationship for much longer than I should have, and it just like, I got married. It was crazy because like a few weeks later, I met this woman, the first woman that I felt truly in love with. I was so burnt out from my relationship that I needed something new. And so because of the history that we've talked about, I don't fall in love easily. I arrived to this party and I see this woman. She was 24 at the time, I was 26. And I just feel something really deep that I don't usually feel. That it was so clear. And I had been through so much bullshit that I was like, I cannot ignore this. I would be stupid if I ignore this.
Okay.
And I think that it was a huge crisis in my life. It was awful, but I think that it was my time to wake up and understand that I was worthy of a relationship that was nurturing, that was tender, and where I could grow and I could actually go to deeper, obscure, more painful places. And it was with her the first time that I talked about that abuse. Like I finally felt comfortable enough with someone at 26 to talk about my deepest wound.
You're describing this feeling of love and safety that you thought you had in this prior relationship because that's what you thought it was supposed to feel like. But then after experiencing the heartbreak of that, like you said, it's like you couldn't deny.
I think that all my guards were down because I was so exhausted emotionally that I just had like no more masks in a way. But for sure, no, I was completely repressing that side.
In those moments of exhaustion, when you just feel totally beat and there's no energy to put up those defenses, right? And the blocks is oftentimes when these things overpower you because you're like, well, my defenses are nowhere to be found. I'm just too exhausted. And now here's this like really amazing energy coming at me and I can't mess it up.
Sometimes you cannot understand something if you haven't seen or lived the opposite, right? Like, I think that is also something that happened there, that I was living in a constant sort of like anxious state with a man that was very aggressive. I was so open because it's like, oh, this is like completely the opposite. Like, wow, I had no idea this existed.
Things happen in all kinds of different orders in life in terms of the sequence of events. Did you happen to notice that as you started to accept this part of yourself and allow for this kind of good energy, goodness to sort of be in your life and start to see yourself as worthy, did that change or shift your work at all?
What I did see was a shift in my other relationships. It was immediate. And that's when I say my second stage in the US, which is one of my most important times in my life. I was such a different person, and I was valuing myself so much more that I gained friends for life. That I suddenly was not feeling alienated. I was feeling like, well, I was a part of the class, of the cliques, beginning to heal that unworthy part of me. I just started walking on clouds because I got into the university that I wanted. But it was so much deeper than what I thought because, my work was fine, but what I gained were peers that I admired and that they also admired me. And that is kind of like, I would say, beyond anything that I would have ever dreamt.
Once you allowed some of that goodness to come into your life, was there any kind of sabotagey energy that you noticed?
Yeah, for sure. A very big moment in my life was that I was admitted to the Sundance Labs, which as a filmmaker, indie filmmaker, is, or at least for me, was a huge thing. And I remember going to the labs and having like the most wonderful time in my life. I was sharing with a lot of people, including Robert Redford giving me advice. So it was like, wow, like I couldn't believe it. And I go back to another wonderful experience, which is giving lessons in Chicago in the Northwestern University. And I remember I was tired. And so I would take naps whenever I could. But like on the third day or fourth day, I was really exhausted. And I remember starting feeling like such deep sadness. And I started feeling like self-hatred out of the blue.
Yeah.
I started feeling really, really, really bad. And I remember I went back to my room and I started crying. I cried for like, I don't know, 40 minutes and I couldn't stop crying. And I called my mom. I get a bit emotional. I don't think I've ever talked about this. And I tell her,
take your time.
I remember telling her, I think there's something wrong with me. I think that what happened to me, that abuse when I was 6, fucked me up. And there's just something wrong with me. I was like at the top or doing really well, but something kind of like pulled me down.
Yeah.
And going back to a place of feeling unworthy and feeling that I was back to being the little girl and the victim and I think that happened when I turned 30. I think that was the last time that I really went like all the way back.
Yeah.
But I see, and I'm working on things that kind of like take me back to the unworthiness and to the fact that this idea of me wanting to save someone or like give someone instead of taking care of myself.
And when you said that to your mom, how did that play out at the time? Was it your mom who said something, or maybe you suddenly felt different? What happened?
She said something very practical. So she said, my love, no, that's not true. You're tired. You have not slept. You need to sleep. You need to rest. You need to take care of yourself. I was giving everything and I was living all this great adventure, but at the cost of my health, which is another part of the spiral.
You mentioned how kind of in your lowest times when you were younger, that's exactly what you had done as well. You felt like you weren't taking care of yourself. And at the time, it was in some kind of effort to hide or to embody that mark, as you'd said, this kind of unworthiness. This time it was very different because you called your mom, you reached out to someone. You weren't by yourself dealing with that. You actually shared it with someone and she gave you some very practical advice. And so you slept, you got some rest. When you woke up and you ate a meal and you had some water and you had to go teach this class, were you feeling differently?
So, yeah. I mean, so much different. And I had the friends that I have today there with me. Maybe I told someone but they know all my story. I've told them everything because when I arrived at that university and we all went to teach together, I was not afraid to say who I was, what I had gone through to anyone.
Yeah.
And so they were there just like, okay, what do you need? We're here. We're backing you up.
You took the power away from that event, right? In moments like that, when you start to take away power from this event that happened to you in the past and start to gain power back within yourself and some control, right, of the situation as well, where you're like, oh, I actually can do something about this right now.
Yeah.
Which is taking a nap, having some food. It can be small, it can be big, but all these little instances can start to, like you said, help you feel like you're capable and can get through these types of things, even if you sometimes travel back to that feeling of unworthiness, even if that is like an undercurrent that you can go back to. It can be a place that you visit for less and less time.
Less and less time. And like what I get, one, is kind of like the biological sort of like aspect of resting, right? Recovering in that sense. What I get after that is a sense of pride.
Mm-hmm.
Is like what I told you about my great grandma, that I feel she went through a horrible situation. And I know that she was feeling unworthy because the man did not want to marry her because of also her race. And so I feel that what really pushes me and gives me like more strength than before, because you go to the spiral, right? You go down into the deep, dark well, but each time is different and each time you get out stronger in a way. My mom is there, my friends are there, my soon-to-be wife is there, but that sense of, well, self-love, I guess, comes from inside. Then you kind of like get to the next level, right?
How is this Fran different than the Fran that you described earlier?
I am hugely different and the same in a way. Mm-hmm. I am different to the girl right after the event in the sense that I find worthiness in who I am. And today, as I told you before, I am not needing someone else to bring the cool into my life, but, you know, I'm finding that in myself.
Yeah.
I had to sort of like endure 20 years of silence. And now that I'm out of that silence and I can speak about this, and I happily speak about this, even if tears come, I'm really happy to share the story with other people, which is very different from the Fran that wanted to hide it. And there's no shame at all in what happened to me anymore, or guilt or anything. And so in all those senses, I'm different. And I am the same as the girl before the event, just like having adventures and like, oh, might be a good idea, and just do it. I feel that I never lost my sense of trust in the world or in just trying things, meeting new people.
What was it about your experience that you're hoping could help other people listening? Was there something you want to share with them?
Although many of us can go through harsh things, it should not be an obstacle for us to achieve our dreams. It is an obstacle, but they should not be, right? Like they should be on the background. All the people that have hurt us should not be protagonists in our stories. They don't deserve a protagonist role. They deserve to be extras that you forget about.
Yeah.
And we should be the protagonists of our stories. And we can with a lot of inner strength, but especially with support of other people. And it's possible. And I know that a lot of women and men, but especially women, don't get out of that dark well.
Yeah.
I can be whoever I want to be, even if I went through this harsh thing.
Thank you all for listening to Fran's episode. We hope you enjoyed it and that you'll tune in for the last episode of Season 2, Sense of Self, next week. I'll be speaking with Janice Vogel, an accomplished film and TV producer and editor, now relationship coach, about how she made sense of herself after motherhood and divorce. Please follow us on Instagram and TikTok at senseofself.podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the episodes from Season 2 and to catch up on Season 1 and its companion expert series. You can also learn more and join our email list at our website, www.senseofselfpod.com. This episode was produced by Dr. Gauri Aragam, Lizzie Rose, and Janice Vogel. It was mixed by Brie Matan with music from Blue Dot Sessions.